Well, hello there, YouTube fam, and a very warm welcome to you on this episode of Lockdown Lowdown. If you're not part of my YouTube family yet, well, as always, you are very welcome to be. So go ahead and hit the subscribe button. And while you're at it, why not hit the bell sign too, so you can get regular notifications every time a new video is out. I am so honoured and delighted to have join us today Sheridan Voysey. Sheridan is a super gifted author, speaker and broadcaster with over 25 years of experience in the field. He is a regular presenter of Pause for Thought on BBC Radio 2 and a frequent contributor to other international networks. My favourite being his thought-provoking and wonderfully encouraging additions to our Daily Bread devotional. He has written 8 books and his writings have been featured in various publications. In his own words, he is husband to the lovely Merryn, a walking buddy to his dog Rupert, a lover of soul, funk and photography, and not to mention a pilgrim in search of wisdom and wonder. Here to talk about his personal journey of faith and his book, The Making of Us, Who We Can Become When Life Doesn't Go As Planned. He joins us now. Sheridan, it's so wonderful to have you join us on this episode.
Thank you, Beverly. I've been looking forward to this and really appreciate the opportunity to talk.
Oh, my pleasure. And likewise, I've been looking forward to this because you have such a God-given blessing and talent gift really to articulate and communicate so effectively with your words. And that is quite game-changing. I wonder whether you've seen the movie A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood?
I have. I just saw it about a week ago.
Isn't it awesome?
Gorgeous?
So
it is
good.
so gorgeous.
It is very smartly done. Tom Hanks, best actor ever. Any character he plays, you think he is him. But yes, for our viewers who may not seen it yet, FYI, it is on Netflix, so you can catch it there. And it's based on the true story of writer Lloyd Vogel and TV children's host Fred Rogers, and it's basically about the friendship that was forged between them. And there's a really interesting scene, and you'd probably remember it, Sheridan, from the start of the movie, where Vogel's character is accepting a literary award, and he says, "We write, as in us writers, we write because we get to expose the truth that others cannot see, and sometimes, just sometimes," dramatic pause, sometimes change the world, change the broken world through our words. So can you relate?
Oh, I really can. And what a great quote for you to lift from that film, because for viewers who go and see it, you'll find out that this is a character who's deeply troubled, and actually Fred Rogers does some wonderful things in his life, and Fred Rogers being a very committed Christian, actually. But those words that he brings are absolutely true, that as writers you get to expose things that sometimes people can't see, they feel, but maybe don't have the words to articulate. And so to be able to do the hard work, I find it very hard to be able to appropriate the world with words, as I heard somebody else put it, is a great opportunity, a great privilege. But for some of us, like myself, it's also very, very hard work. It takes me a long time to write well. But I appreciate you bring that quote, because it's a wonderful quote.
Absolutely, and I can imagine the hard work, and I've got to sort of make a shout out, if you will, to that hard work, because we were talking before we started the interview about our daily bread, and that's my favourite out of your great work. One of my favourites is your contributions to our Daily Bread devotional. And for guys who are watching who don't know about it, I will leave a link in the video description. Do check it out. It's a beautiful devotional for every day, and Sheridan is a regular contributor to it. So just thank you for that, because it makes such a difference. My family and I, we start the day with it, and it's just a beautiful few minutes of reflection, and I think you have to be so selective with your words when you're limited of words. How do you get your inspiration for your books, for Our Daily Bread? How do you pick these things up?
Well, funnily, just today I've been writing some articles for Our Daily Bread, and 60 million people sit down and read the print edition every single day around the world. And another 10 or 20 million are then following on with the various digital platforms that they have. So it's an amazing publication that is touching people all around the world. My inspiration comes from walking, journaling, praying, scribbling notes, and I can actually show you a whole bunch of files that I have where I just do it very old school. I'll come up with an idea, I'll scribble it down on a little piece of A5 paper, I'll throw it into that folder. When it comes to my Our Daily Bread writing days, every month I'll pull out that folder and have a look at it. Then comes the hard work. But that whole process really is just kind of walking with God through life and then praying it through, asking God to open us to what he's seeing in the world and the experience that we're having, that often we, of course, are completely missing. What is the deeper meaning of what I'm going through? What is the deeper meaning of that conversation I had today? What's the deeper meaning of this difficulty that I'm walking through, or this moment of delight or joy? What's the deeper meaning? What are you seeing in this, God, that I need to see? And then taking it to the journal. Now, I have many journals, but they are always something very, very simple like this. They are just a spiral-bound A5 book, and I, first of all, suggest to people that they get out of their minds this idea that they have to journal every day. Because whenever I talk about the wonders of journaling, people straight away say to me, oh, I tried it, but I couldn't keep it up. And I say, what do you mean keep it up? And they say, well, you're supposed to do it every day, aren't you? I say, no, your journal is there to serve you, not you to serve it. And so I keep my journal for really 4 things: highs, lows, questions, and discoveries. That's what I use my journal for. And there will be weeks that I don't put anything in my journal because I don't have any particular highs, lows, questions, or discoveries. And there'll be other times that I'm journaling every single day. But all of the books, all of the journal articles, all of the Our Daily Bread pieces, everything that I do, all of the radio spots I do for BBC Radio 2, all come out of that journal, because that's where I kind of work that process through with God. So I hope that's a creative tip for somebody.
Oh, for me, definitely. And I'm sure for others as well who are watching, because, yeah, you're quite right. Journaling is one of those things that we think we can't keep up with. So might as well not even try. I have journaled in the past, and when I've gone back to those journals, it's been like, wow, I thought that, or ha ha ha, wasn't I cute? You know, that kind of thing. But it is so good, because it's a time of your life that has been documented now, and your thoughts and your feelings. And I liked how you broke it down. So highs, lows, questions, and discoveries. And that's so important, because sometimes we have these emotions as human beings, and especially as adults navigating through life in the 21st century. And we don't know, because we haven't paused to think about it, to process it. Sometimes we understand after the fact, if you will, or after the event. But if we're going through something and we're journaling, I think it's a wonderful way to be more self-aware as well, and bring that awareness to God. I think we have a clearer mindset as well.
Oh yeah, T.S. Eliot said, we had the experience, but we missed the meaning. And I think that happens to us almost every day. And so when you have that process of just going, and it might just be a couple of bullet points, that's all you need to do, but it helps us to see the meaning, especially then over time. It's fascinating to see then how your life has changed, or sometimes how it hasn't changed. I've also sometimes read over maybe a few years of my journals. When I was writing a book called Resurrection Year, which is all about my wife and I going through infertility, I read through 10 years of journals just to see what that story was again. And I was interested to see the progress, but also to see how sometimes I was spiraling around the same topics over and over because I hadn't really dealt with them. So as a creative tool, as a spiritual tool, I can't recommend journaling highly enough.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you for that, Sheridan. So you spoke about Our Daily Bread and its reach, basically, and then Of course, BBC Radio 2, Pause for Thought. I've heard something like 9 million people are reported to be tuning in every day. So God is using you in amazing ways, which is fantastic, and that gift and talent that he's given you. But I wonder, that's where you are now, where he has you now. But how did it begin? Did you ever have sort of an aha moment where you were like, I think I have a way with words? How did you discover that actually, I can write, I can communicate, I can talk effectively?
It's a great question, Beverly, because I'm the last person who should be doing anything in front of an audience. I was an only child for the first 12 and a half years of my life. I was very used to solitude. I was very used to just me and playing with the dog in the garage on a Saturday morning. I wasn't one for getting up and having the confidence to speak in front of anybody at all. Long story short, I, in my teens, really wanted to become a nightclub DJ. And so I was DJing in nightclubs actually from the age of about 16, 17. And I came runner-up in a state-based competition in Queensland in Australia. And I thought this was the beginning of my dreams coming true. Actually, I felt empty. And that led to me becoming a Christian. And when I became a Christian, suddenly I had this urge to communicate. And I don't know where it came from. We now know it's the Spirit of God who comes and gives us gifts and passions to do his work. But I didn't know quite what to do with it. I certainly had no interest in radio. But through a very wonderful experience, I was led to go to Bible college to study the Bible, and also to start doing some part-time work at a little community radio station, which is where I learnt the craft of radio. Made a lot of mistakes. Thankfully, I don't think there are any tapes available of those early days. And Beverly, you're on radio as well, so you well know the early days we probably would rather forget with the amount of mistakes that we can sometimes make. But that then led to me going into full-time radio, and then I ended up moving to Sydney and starting a national show called Open House. And then 10 years ago, we moved to the UK, and life kind of took a different direction. But that's how it began. It began with a passion. I really wanted to communicate the things of God to other people. The radio bit was a surprise and unexpected. And in about the year 2000, I really wanted to start writing. Started writing a book, which to this day has never been published, but I spent about 2 years of Saturday mornings and Friday afternoons working on that. That really was my apprenticeship in how to write. I started to get some opportunities to write for magazine articles, and then I was able to write for a sister publication of Our Daily Bread, which back then was called Soul Journey. It doesn't exist anymore, but it was kind of a young adult's version of Our Daily Bread. And then other writing opportunities, and I began to speak in public and started to do preaching in churches and then speaking at conferences. And so really it's been a 25-year journey of kind of developing that. But it all comes down to that moment where I became a Christian, and suddenly, God's drive within me moved me forward to this. But I still kind of look back and go, wow, you're the last person who should be in front of an audience.
Oh, wow. And I love how you've encouraged us, without perhaps knowing it, that it's been a 25-year or so journey to get to this stage, because often a time when we see a talented person, we think, but God gave them that. That's great. Yes, God gives us gifts, but then we have to cultivate them too. So thank you for that encouragement. And, if it's something that you constantly have to work on, and it takes time to master, then that's encouraging. We all have hope. We can keep going. We can keep shaping that up. And you've spoken wonderfully about ways to cultivate. You spoke about journaling. Any other tips or tricks that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah. Well, here's a little tip from radio. So in radio, you have something called an air check machine. And in the old days, it used to be a cassette, and the cassette recorder was hooked up to your microphone, and it only recorded your microphone. So maybe you did a 4-hour music shift, but it only recorded your talk breaks, the little bits where you talked in between the records. You'd take that cassette out, you'd pop it into your car on the way home, you'd listen back to yourself. And it's such an important thing to do. It's horrible sometimes. Very few of us like listening to our own voice. But it's really important to listen to yourself as a listener. Sit in that seat, listen back to a recording of that talk that you gave. Listen to the interview that you were able to do on a radio or whatever it might be. Get the perspective of the listener. So that's if you're involved in some kind of audible, kind of verbal communication of some sort. When it comes to writing, do exactly the same thing, but use your friends and give them this charge and say, please give me your honest feedback on this article or this book chapter I'm writing or this poem that I've written. You will not help me if you only tell me how wonderful it is because you're afraid of hurting my feelings. Tell me the honest truth. Is it working? Is it making sense? Does it communicate? Or are you just left baffled at the end? I have had whole chapters of books either reworked or in some cases deleted as a result of that kind of process. So get feedback, objective feedback on your work. It's hard to listen to, it's hard to read, but it's so important.
It is so important. And the book of Proverbs really encourages us to take criticism well, and that, it's constructive. If that's how you take it, then you can better yourself. And that's, this life is short. Why not listen, and why not improve? Because that's the way forward, and we want to go forward. So thanks, Sheridan. You spoke about how you became a Christian, and it was about DJing before that. But tell us more. One of my favorite questions to ask another believer is, how did you come to know Jesus? So tell us a little bit more about that, Sheridan.
Well, the really interesting backstory is that my parents, for many, many years, were members of a very well-known Christian sect. My mum had been a missionary with this group, and my dad had been a local missionary in London before they had moved to Australia. They'd been in it for a lot of years. But they'd been in it long enough to see the contradictions that were coming out of the teaching through this group. And they started to really have questions about whether this was the right way. This particular group said that they were the only true church, they were the only true body of believers in the world. Everybody else was going to hell. So they couldn't go to any other church to ask questions because that was going to be very much frowned on. So my mum, bless her, she spent years really seeking God as to particularly who Jesus is, as is the case for almost every religious approach. It all comes down to the person of Jesus. Do we believe that he was just a man who was very inspired and very inspiring, wandering the hills telling nice stories that kept all the children happy? Do we believe he was an angel in disguise, as some religions believe? Do we believe he was God incarnate, as Orthodox Christianity believes? Well, Mum went on that journey, and she was able to discover that Jesus was actually far more than a man. He certainly wasn't an angel in disguise. He was God in the flesh. And she had a wonderful transformation in her life. And that happened just as I was becoming disillusioned with the nightclubs. And I saw the change in her. And then about 3-4 months after her, saw the change in my dad. And that really impacted me. So there came a time where I was dragged along to church. I think they used the excuse that my brother was performing in some kind of children's play or something, and I should come along and support him. And I was able to hear the gospel. I kept on going. I didn't actually become a Christian straight away. I actually made some friends. Some people reached out to me on that first meeting when I went there. And I went back to church, and I went back to church and back to church. And finally one night I made a commitment. Now, that wasn't the beginning of my Christian life. I actually was still in the nightclubs, and they were pulling me one way, and it felt like church was pulling me the other. And for a while I was wondering if I could do both. And for me, I had to let go of one to be able to follow the other. And once I did that, then my Christian life really took off. So there's so much more. Gosh, we could spend an hour on this one alone, but that's kind of really where it happened. And my goodness, where would I be if I hadn't had that transformation, had that change of direction? I wouldn't be communicating, wouldn't be writing, wouldn't be doing any of those things. God has wonderful plans for us. I know it sounds cliche and sounds a bit twee, but, he has some amazing plans for us. And they're beyond our imagination. We just put our life in his hands and see where he takes us.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Sheridan. And speaking of his plans, the making of us, got to make sure I hold this right in front of my very bright light. This is so beautifully written. I'm enjoying reading it. I haven't quite finished it yet, but I'm looking forward to getting to the end. But it's great because it really reiterates and echoes that message that God has great plans. We make our own plans, as we do, because it's a very normal, natural human thing to do, but those plans don't always go according to what our 12-year-old or 18-year-old or 25-year-old self thought it would pan out to be. So, but there is hope, and if we place our trust in him, easier said than done, it can even be better than what we thought, would be best. Tell us a little bit more about the book, because I could attempt that, but I wouldn't do it as much justice as the author himself. So for our listeners, tell us more about the making of us, please, Sheridan.
Yeah, so life was going really well for us in Sydney, and particularly for me when I was still in Sydney, in Australia. I had this national show, which had been a dream come true, speaking opportunities, book writing contracts, things like that. But Merryn and I had 10 years of trying to start a family, and everything we tried just didn't work. We tried IVF, we waited for 2 or 3 years on the adoption list in Australia. Nothing really worked. And we came to the end of that 10 years, and Merryn really needed a new beginning. That story can be told in a book called Resurrection Year, if you want to read that in a lot more depth. But that resulted in Merryn getting offered a job at Oxford University, us moving to the UK for her to have that new beginning. And life then was suddenly upended for me. And so after 15 years of having really clear direction about what I was supposed to do, write, speak, broadcast, I came to this country and in many ways had to start again. And I wasn't sure who I was or, what I was supposed to do with my life. And that was a surprise to me because I'd always known. But I had to ask the big questions all over again. There's 2 big questions that humans ask. Who am I? What am I doing here? And I had answered those, and then I didn't know what the answer was anymore. The making of us is really a follow-on to Resurrection Year, as I kind of then start to work out this whole idea. Who can we become when life hasn't gone as planned? Because sometimes the plans don't turn out. They just don't. Maybe we wanted to get married and we haven't gotten married yet. Or we wanted to have children. We didn't have children. Or we had children and we're not in good relationships with them anymore. Maybe we had a dream career and we never got the dream career, or we had it and we lost it. All of us, I think, by the time we reach our 40s, have got some kind of broken dream that we need to deal with and wrestle with. And the making of us was really exploring that. And long story short, the big discovery for me, and the whole book is based on a pilgrimage that a friend and I do in the north of England, and it's kind of this 10 days and we're walking and talking and things. But the big revelation that happened for me through that can really be summed up in a few verses in the book of Ephesians. The Apostle Paul says, "Follow God's example as dearly loved children and walk in the way of love, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God." Follow God's example as dearly loved children and walk in the way of love. That answers the great 2 questions of humanity. Who am I and what am I supposed to do with my life? I'm supposed to follow God's example, that's character, grow to be like him, who's full of compassion and grace and mercy and joy and faithfulness. I'm God's dearly loved children. Before I'm a writer, speaker, broadcaster, husband, brother, friend, I am God's child. And I had given lip service to that. I had written articles about that. I'd preached about that. I'd spoken about that. But when you lose a dream, you discover how deep that has actually gone into your soul. And I had to really go deep on that. That is the most precious, precious identity any of us can ever receive, because it can never be taken away. It can never be harmed by life going wrong. It can never be taken away by illness or tragedy. Death can't even take it away. We will always be children of God when we submit our lives to him. And then the third one is a wonderful phrase, walk in the way of love. Before I go and write books or speak somewhere, before we do video on YouTube, before we go about our daily tasks as a baker or a cook or an engineer or whatever it might be, we are called to live a life of love. That is the river through which all the little streams of our life should be flowing. And that's a wonderful, freeing thing to discover, that ultimately I'm called to love. I'm called to love the people around me, love my neighbours, even sometimes love my enemies. And that means that there's a lot of little things that are incredibly deeply important. It's not all about the big things, Sheridan. And so if the book doesn't sell well, have you loved today? Is anybody listening to the podcast? Have you loved today? Ultimately, love is our core mission. So that gives you a little bit as to the making of us. I hope there's a whole bunch more in there. There's 160 pages or something. But certainly that's some of the discoveries that I made along that way.
Beautiful. Guys, I highly recommend it. Definitely. For me, just reading it has been, well, Sheridan has such a beautiful way of setting the scene. So you kind of feel like you're there with him as you read through, but highly, highly recommend it. And I will leave a link in the video description below where you can not just catch this book, but Sheridan's other books as well. Resurrection Year, and there's 6 more and I'm sure more coming out too, so yes, so make sure you check it out. Definitely worth the read. Sheridan, I was wondering, you've gone through different parts of your life, and especially those 10 years through the wilderness, if you will, and then even after that coming out and trying to discover your identity, if you will, again. What would you say to those of us who may be watching today, listening to this episode, and they're going through a similar journey at the moment, or part of that journey, where they had hoped very much for something, maybe very legitimately, a good thing, a God-ordained thing, as some might call it, but it hasn't happened, and they are maybe asking those same questions. From someone who sort of walked a similar path, what would be your advice to them?
Our God is incredibly clever at taking those very moments and turning them into something really beautiful. There is a kind of beauty that can come out of the devastation that wouldn't exist without the devastation in the hands of God. And this has been the big discovery for me, is that the broken dream can really indeed lead to a new beginning. So the last 10 years, it's going to come up to 10 years, really, since Resurrection Year was released. My focus in the work that I do is in many ways changed. I was kind of an apologist on radio before that. I was giving people really good reasons to believe in God and everything, and that was all good. But these days I speak a lot about that whole area of broken dreams, and it's been incredibly fruitful to be able to help people, walk people, to just be in the room with people when they're going through their broken dream, and to not give any easy answers, because sometimes it can take quite a few years until you can actually see something that you can go, that's redemptive. But to also know with every fibre of my being that if you do that process, if you walk with God through that disappointment, whether it be singleness or childlessness or a dream career, whatever it might be, that there are things to learn and there are treasures within that experience that you can take and offer as gifts to other people. And particularly when it comes to this area of redemption, this ability to be able to take something and turn it into something good that otherwise couldn't have come about. And for me, that has been the books, but it's been all the thinking and all the praying and all the discussion and all the walking with people through that I wouldn't have done had life gone completely to plan and I'd continued to go in the direction I was going. It's in these gritty moments that God, uses the grit to create the pearl, so to speak, as the proverb goes. And trust that as you walk through that, go into your experience, journal about it, as we talked about, talk about it, study it, that you will then be able to get things to be able to give to other people through that. That is where the joy comes, to be able to say, I've learned a bunch of things that I can now pass on to others. So it hasn't been meaningless. It's actually really fruitful. That can be something you can hold on to. Other than that, I would say, read Ephesians 5, 1 and 2 every day for the next 3 months and bathe in it. You are called to follow God's example as his dearly loved child and walk in the way of love. Do those two things and you'll find yourself in a better place.
Thank you. That's a great prescription. Thank you so much. And there's a saying that we hear often in church settings, if you will. It's God doesn't waste a hurt. And it's so true. He doesn't. If we take that pain and that questioning to him, like Hannah, for instance, in the Old Testament, who so desperately longed for a child. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't, whatever that dream may be that we want to come into existence and become a reality, but he doesn't waste that pain. And if we turn to him with it, he uses it for a greater good. And others who are going through that similar walk at another time, we can come to them because we've been through that. Just quickly, I'd like to share a true story because it's amazing. It truly is amazing how God can use the most random things to talk to us, and talk through people. But we've recently moved house, and there are a few things in the house that needed fixing. So we got in touch with a sort of local handyman, if you will. We'd never met him before, and he comes in, has this sort of very Eastern European way about him, in that he's very direct, very straight, and very helpful. And he goes off, and then he has to come again for another project. And this time we get to talking. We offer him tea, coffee, no thank you, and starts talking about us, starts asking different questions. And then I ask him the sort of usual question that you think it's very, normal. I ask him, so is your family here? And suddenly his whole demeanor changes, and a very sort of simple question, as one would think it, he struggles to answer it. And my mum sort of nudges him, and she goes, do you have family? And he says, yes, and laughs a little. I do have a family. I have a child. I have a 15-year-old son, and my wife of, I believe he said it was 20 years they'd been together. She had passed away 2 months ago. And you just think to yourself, 2 months? That happened 2 months ago, and here you are back to work, totally normal, though I know, inside is not normal, I'm sure. And yet people go about their business, and you'd never know what they're going through. But we started talking about my brother, Ashley, who is in heaven now. Mum, I suppose, to kind of find middle ground and make him feel comfortable, said, I lost my son. And he said something very profound. He said, people try to find the right words, and they want to tell you something special, something that's different. But you've been through that. I've been through that. You know what it's like. I know what it's like. And, that's enough. Like that's enough to know that the other person knows what it's like. So that's so true. That just having gone through that experience, it might not be even that we say something very profound, but just the other person knowing that, they've walked in similar shoes. So that can make a world of a difference, I suppose.
Oh, yeah. That C.S. Lewis movie, Shadowlands, we don't have any record that C.S. Lewis actually said it, but there's a line in there that Anthony Hopkins gives, which something along the lines of, we read to know we're not alone. There is that deep sense of just to know somebody else has gone through what I've gone through, and in this case, you know, between your mum and that workman, just to know that I'm not alone in this is an incredible comfort. And that can really lead to some wonderful moments of togetherness, of communion, which you otherwise couldn't have. Sometimes it doesn't take the pain away, but can certainly ease the burden a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Sheridan, thank you for those words of wisdom. There's a wonderful part of your book that I think would be, and I believe you think it would be as well, very appropriate, an appropriate way to end the interview. So would you be so kind as to reading that out to us?
Yeah, this is called The Creed. There's a longer version of it in the book. I'll read a slightly edited version just for time. You can download this on my website, and I've actually got a copy up on my wall. I read it every couple of days just to remind me about what matters most. When you're going through a difficult time, sometimes that's what you need. What are the main things I should be on about today? I went into a cafe after writing The Making of Us, and I scribbled this down. This is my little creed, and I hope it helps you. It goes like this. The hand that spins the galaxies brought me into being. The one who holds the stars has made me his own. I am God's child. My life is rich. My days are sacred. I am held by a love that's wider and higher than the farthest edges of this expanding universe. I am a pilgrim in this world, in search of wisdom and wonder. I will take new adventures and follow God into the unknown. What I achieve is not as important as the person I become, so I will seek to imitate the nail-pierced one. I will step in the direction of my strengths and talents. They are spirit-given tools for my God-given tasks. I will pay attention to my persistent aspirations. They could be the whispers of God. I will serve all I can and walk deeply with a few. I will aim for great things, but leave my legacy to God. The path is long and the terrain at times hard. Still, I will not wish for another's life. I will take my place, play my part. Something important will be missed if I don't, for the hand that spins the galaxies wants me here.
That's so beautiful. Thank you so much, Sheridan. And guys, if you'd like to hear more of Sheridan, then do check out his website. I will put a link in the video description below. He has a YouTube channel. Make sure you go check that out and subscribe to his channel as well. Thanks so much, Sheridan.
Thanks, Beverly. Great to be with you.